Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. We are chatting with Joshua Williamson because we're always talking to Joshua Williamson on this show. It's All Stars, everybody.
Yes.
Welcome back, man.
Today we're going to be answering your questions. You know, Sal very smartly posted a thing saying we can talk a little bit more about process, a little bit more about the actual act of writing. We've never really gotten too deep into that. We mostly just talk about what we like. So
Yeah.
it's bullshit for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like always, Sal and I have just been talking for, well, I guess it wasn't that long. We talked for about a half hour.
Yeah, it was only half an hour, which is pretty
hours.
short for our usual chat. So it's, yes.
Before we dive into that, I do feel like I should do a little bit of a salesmanship, to everybody. Don't forget to buy G.I. Joe is ongoing. You should buy some G.I. Joe comic books. Superman is still ongoing with awesome Dan Mora art. So it's 19 through 24. February 24 just came out this week.
Yes,
25 is out in April. You should pre-order it because FOC is coming on this Monday. But definitely get Superman. Dan Mora will be back with issue 28. That's something I feel like I get a lot, is that like Eddie Burrows is awesome. I love working with him. I'm really glad that he's been doing this story we're doing. He did the Lex Luthor special, and we were like, I think it makes sense for him to do some of these Lex pieces before we get to what we're doing with issue 28, which is a really big issue. But Dan Mora will be back for that storyline, so it's very exciting. I hope people keep on. 25 is a big issue. It has art by Eddie, plus Dan Mora, plus Jamal Campbell came back to do a few pages.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's really fun. He did a scene that when I was writing it, I'm like, man, I wish Jamal could draw this scene. And I asked Paul Kaminsky, and he was like, let's find out. Let's see if he'll do it. And then Jamal was like, I can do it. I was like, yeah. But yeah, so let's dive into everybody's questions. We're gonna try to get done as much as we can today, and then Sal and I will do another video where we'll keep going
further.
Yeah, we'll keep going. When I'm writing, it's interesting with some of these questions because I have done a lot of. I'm at a muscle memory point with some of this. Like some of the questions it's kind of funny. People come ask you where you come up with your ideas kind of question, and it's from everywhere. Yeah. It's not like I have a special panic room I sit in with nothing on the walls, and I just sit there and it's like I'll be watching a movie. Yesterday I was on the treadmill and I had an idea for something where it popped in my head, and then the first thing I did was Google it to see if anyone else had done it before, and guess what? They had. So, sometimes you're just things just come at you, and you start thinking about things. I mean, I'll give you an example for that one. I was thinking about, this was the process in my brain, and I can talk about this because somebody already did it. I was in my brain, and I was there was this movie, and I couldn't remember the name of it, and I'm like, oh, it was called Son of a Gun, and I'm like, that's interesting as a title, Son of a Gun, it's a phrase, and then I was like, what other son of phrases are there? And I was like, oh, son of a bitch is a phrase. And then I'm like, what if somebody did a book called Son of a Witch? And I'm like, it's playful. And I immediately Googled it. Yep, that's a very famous book. That's been done. It's been done. So it's and then you go, oh yeah, they did exactly what I want to do. So it's one of those things where you're these ideas just kind of come from everywhere. And then I have notebooks full of stuff I write down, and then it's a matter of finding places for it. But my process, it really is I start off with a lot of notebook work and just jotting ideas down and thinking about those ideas. And really, I spend a lot of time in my notebooks before I actually get to the process of writing. We are going to answer the questions. I'm just kind of getting to this first. A lot of notebook work stuff. It's just random ideas, random thoughts, sometimes lines of dialogue, sometimes scenes, just concepts, whatever. I just fill notebooks full of it and try to find places for it. I have ideas that I'll spend a really long time working on, even something like Birthright, which was a Skybound image book I did. That was something where I originally had the idea in 2007, and I had scenes and I had concepts, but I never actually started writing it. And it kept changing. It just kept changing and changing in terms of tone, story, characters, everything. It was these pieces kept moving around until eventually it became the book. But that book didn't start coming out until 2014. So it was 7 years of me developing and looking at it. Now, when it comes to actually writing those notebooks up, a lot of times I'll take things to the whiteboard and I write down concepts or characters, and then I literally will write down, if I'm writing in issue 1, I'll write down 1 through 22 or 1 through 30, more likely, and start figuring out the pacing of the book and how I want to do it. And this is sort of my overall process. And then I will take a walk and I will just walk through a lot of the dialogue in my head or the scenes in my head. And sometimes I'll record myself. We've talked about this. This is I will record myself talking to myself, and then come back and listen to it and be like, yeah, that worked. That doesn't work. Yeah, that worked. That doesn't work. And I use all that and I plug it in to basically making the script. So this is sort of part of my process in terms of just really logistical stuff. But All right, let's dive into some questions. Okay. Oh, this is funny. All right, so this is from the King of Rooks. What are things outside of the obvious sick writer, artist, distributor imploding, cough diamond, cough, etc., could contribute to making a book have a delay? Like, say everyone is working full steam ahead to try and put the book out on time, it doesn't work out. What are some things along the process that could have gotten in the way of hitting that date? Oh, so many things. I mean, ultimately, people are human, and humans make mistakes. And every once in a while, sometimes people catch things late in the game, and it's like you have to make a hard call of like, do we let that go or not? I mean, there have been times books have been late because somebody's caught a continuity error, and I mean like big continuity errors, like things happen, and or it conflicts with somebody else's story. Those are things that have really happened. There are just straight up logistical issues. You know, I mean, it is funny how you're saying like Diamond, but it's like, you know. Yeah, aside from sick writer and artist, sometimes things just happen, and you know, sometimes people are just late with their books. But there are things like there are problems with the printer, there are problems with the shipping, like those things do happen. You know, and again, people are human, and you can only expect so much from people, right? It's like, you know, sometimes the unsung heroes of comics are people that work in production, and they should not have to work on the weekends. You know what I mean? It's like. And I think rightfully so, a lot of production houses and comics have boundaries of like, if this isn't in by this date, you know, it's going to be late. You know, it isn't, you're not 1 minute late. It's weird. If you miss that deadline, you're not 1 minute late, you're a week late. Right. You know what I mean? It's like, and sometimes those things just happen, you know, but ultimately people are human, and I can't get too deep into writers taking a long time. Writers get writer's block. You know, some of us take forever. You know, I'm not going to speak to artists because they are, you know, chained to those tables doing the best they can. And again, you're starting to talk about health issues, which is what you were saying, aside from sickness. But some of my peers, I try actively to not be late. I try really hard to turn my scripts in, because I think that is the beginning of the assembly line. It just, you know, if I don't turn it in, then the artist has less time to work on it. The inker, colorist, letter, production, every step of the way can derail. And it's sad to say, sometimes people just, you know, turn their stuff in late, and there's a million reasons why. Ultimately, it's just people are human. Hopefully that answers your question. I aspire to write comics, and I've heard as a writer you were sometimes assigned to a character. And I've always worried, what if I hadn't read enough about said character, or is that not true? And I've been worried for nothing. I'm going to kind of say not true. I have mixed feelings on this. I think people should only pitch for characters that they have a passion for, you know? Right. But every once in a while, an editor might come to you and they might say, do you want to write this character? We have an opening for this. Is something you'd be interested in? You know, and if you go by Ghostbusters, if somebody asks you for a god, you say yes, right? Right. And if you want to get work comic, it depends on you. But I mean, also, most editors don't really like to do that. They try to think of who is right for it. It's rough, because I remember when I was trying to break in, there was a phrase I would hear, other writers would hear, where it was, we don't have something. Oh, what was the phrase? It was, we don't have something for you. That doesn't mean they don't have books. Doesn't mean they have openings. It means for you. So like, if you're a comedy writer and the only book they have left is a horror book, they might not consider you for it. And you know, when I got the Flash job, I remember talking to Dan about it, and before I even said I will only work on Flash, which was part of my thing at the time, I was like, I will only write Flash. That was part of it in the beginning. One of the things they said was, we're having a little bit of an echo, I realize, I think. Oh, yeah? Maybe. I don't know. One of the things that I said to Dan was, I want to do Flash, but Dan was like, what do you think about Wild Dog? Like, writing Wild Dog. And I don't know Wild Dog. I don't know. So for me, I just was like, no, I'm not interested in that. Yeah. Because I had a passion for Flash. That's where my head was. I wanted to do that. And if that wasn't available, I was totally cool. You know, I wasn't saying to fire anybody. I was just like, this is what I want to do. So I'm going to kind of say, no, don't worry about that as much. But I will say, I'm a big believer that when you do come onto a book, whether you have passion for that character or not, you should do your homework. Like, you should go and read those books, read them, you know? Yeah,
that's the thing that okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's the thing that I bring up when we've talked on the couch with the guys on different shows, where I've said, like, you know, one of the like tenets of your kind of approach is that no matter what, you always check to see where the character was last.
Yeah.
So that you don't step on the toe whoever did that.
I find out what that character's last appearance was, and I read that last appearance. And it depends on what it is. Like some characters you read, you know, you go and you read more, or I'll just call that creator up and be like, "Yo, what was up with this?" You know,
Right.
like, you know, when we were doing the Booster stuff, you know, with Booster with All In, like we knew Booster was going to go missing. I just talked to Ann Jerkins. You know,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
sort of like, here's what we're thinking about doing. Well, also, I try to be really respectful of other creators and the work they've done. I try really hard to not completely dismiss what other creators have done, the work they've done, regardless of whether it was a hit or whatever. I really try to respect all the work they did, not just throw it out the window. You know, I know and it's hard. It's hard sometimes. And sometimes you miss. Sometimes you're like, I forgot about that, or we, you know. But I make the effort to try.
Yes.
To you know, and it's tough when you have characters that are like, it's always funny because everybody wants character growth from the characters, but not really.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny, but it depends on which character growth they want. Is always, you know what I mean? It's interesting. Right. But so for you, if you want to write comics, I would really here's the other thing that I talk to people about when they talk about writing comics and writing these characters. You really should try to write characters you actually care about and really should have some kind of passion for. There are situations where people will come to you and say, "What about this?" And then it really falls on you to make that decision of, do you want to go on this path? Because let me tell you something. You know what sucks? Writing something you don't care about.
Yeah.
That sucks. And ultimately, one of the rules I have is you should write the books you want to read. Like they should be what you feel you would enjoy as a reader. Because if you're not making a book that you would like, it's over, you know. So it's always fascinating people compare to other writers and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I'm like this writer. It's like, well, yeah, I might even like that writer's book. You know, it's like it's a weird thing. So I would say for you, like, don't feel like you're going to be forced into a situation if this is it, where it's like you have to write, you know, one of the character you don't really care about. But you know, Andy Corey talks about this a bit. He's the editor on Ninja Turtles now for IW, but he was a senior editor for DC for a long time. Andy openly would talk about how he was not a Green Arrow person. He never got Green Arrow, but he, as an editor, was assigned Green Arrow as part of Rebirth. In the process of working on Green Arrow, working with Ben Percy on Green Arrow, he grew to really love the character and really understood the character. But that's a different job set. You know, it is different. You can find something you love about those characters, but I wouldn't worry about feeling like you're going to be forced onto a character you haven't read enough about. But then that's the trick, is then you better get reading. You know, if you're those choices, like, just listen, subscribe to one of the services. Either you subscribe to if you're at Marvel, to the Unlimited, to Infinity, like, or just, you know, stop by your comic book store. Or also, guess what, libraries. Like, I mean, Hoopla. And read them. I would say read the comics, though. I really make an effort. And I know there's a question that comes through later. I avoid the wiki entries because those sometimes will not be updated, or they have information that's conflicting. You got to read it for yourself. Like, I really actively read it for yourself.
Yeah.
Are you planning to do something with Flatline in the future? I think she's one of your more standout characters, and people really like her in the DC subreddit, and I would love to see more of her. I love Flatline. Love her. I wish I could write more of her. There is a plan for Flatline. I don't know if I will be the one to write it. I've had a lot of conversations with them about this. There is a place for Flatline. I know where she's going. I can't say anything else. But yes, I love Flatline, and I'm aware she has a really passionate fandom, and it makes me really, really happy to know that, because I really like her character a lot. How does it feel? This is a question from Elite Zero. How does it feel to always be months ahead in terms of your writing versus what the public is reading? Does that mess with your perception of time and other areas of your life? Yes, it does a lot. You know, I can tell you right now what happens in Superman 36. That's not coming out for a while.
Yeah.
And that definitely screws time. Like, right now it is March. My brain is in three places. It is in right now. It is in March of March of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
My brain is also in the fall of 25. And my brain is also in 2026 already. Right. So, and some places 2027. So it really does. Like, I'm telling you, when you have to turn in a solicit, so we've talked before, I write my own solicits. I intentionally make them misleading at times, because I don't want to completely just tell you what's going to happen. I want you to read the book. But there are times when I have to write solicit copy. So I turned in my solicit copy early on Superman. And so I turned in up to the September issue of this year. And that was like a little heartbreaking because it's like the year is already over. Like that's how it is sometimes. You're just like, when you're having conversations about what's happening in 2026, you're just like, it really messes with you. But then also I have to be very careful because sometimes I forget that you haven't read this stuff that's coming out, you know?
Yeah. Someone has a question today about something that happened that came out this week that you wrote 6-8 months ago, and you're like,
yeah, that's what's funny about this stuff too, is that like I have to be careful. So like I'll give you an example, is that Resurrection Man, I read the first 3 issues of Rom's Resurrection Man, and I really liked it a lot. Like I think you and I talked about it. I was like, I really liked it a lot. I was like, I have to be careful because I'll get to read issue 1s really early. And sometimes I get to read pitches really early, and I get to read a lot of stuff as part of my consulting with DC. I get to read a lot of stuff really early. And so when I get like an issue 1 really early, it is funny because I can't like publicly talk about it. Sometimes I have to be careful, and I'll find out like, oh, this isn't even out yet. This isn't out for like 6 months or something, you know? It's always, I try to stay a little careful on those kinds of things. But yeah, it definitely messes with time. Okay, so Marvel Craft Gamer 4086. One of these is gonna be some crazy like name. It's gonna be some it's gonna throw me off. Anyway, so odd question, but how do you come up with the names for characters? I find that to be an odd struggle of mine in writing, or I'm able to come up with a character about their name. Also, your Superman run is my first ongoing for the character. I gotta say, it's definitely a favorite. Stay awesome. Oh, thank you. Stay awesome to you too. So I'm gonna tell you a secret about character names. Look at the streets in the neighborhood you live in. It's not silly, but let me tell you, it will help you. Like it will. I mean, I try actively not to name character people I know. Like I don't do that. I have a colleague, a peer who does it a lot. I think it's funny. I don't do that. I literally will look at, I'll hear random stuff sometimes. You know, you hear a name, you go, oh, that's interesting. And you hear this, and you go, oh, that could work. I will look at the street names around where I've lived, or not where I live now, but where I lived in the past. The other trick, I will sometimes use professional wrestlers' names. Like they're like, that's why the Birthright, the characters are named, they're the Rhodes family. That is because of the Rhodes family.
Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, Dusty, Dustin, Cody, like that's where that came from. They are the Rhodes family because of the Rhodes family. So every once in a while I look at wrestler names too. It is hard and it can be really annoying. This happened recently on a book I was pitching for, and I had the idea, I had the story, I had the character, I had the concept, everything was all nailed down. It took me a week to figure out the names of the characters. Like I would talk to the editor and I'm like, I have the pitch. It's like it's for a mini series. So I was like, I have it. I have one problem. I don't know the names of the characters. So then you get weird. Then you get weird on it, right? So here's the thing I'll also add to you is secrets. Okay. So then you start looking at like, okay, who are the characters, right? Like who are the characters? What do they represent? And then looking up like words that are associated with it, right? Yeah. I can't get into it without spoiling other stuff, but it's like you look up, what names have meanings that coincide with who I think that character is. Yeah. So you also look at that, right? Like what are some last names or first names that mean? So if you have a character, their entire personality is that they're very bright and sunny, you might look up words that are associated with characters that have to do with the sun, right? Like last names, they go in that realm. That's where you start. You start there. You start looking at things like that, and that's how I do it. It is a pain. Don't get me wrong, it's a pain. It's really why superhero books are easier because all that stuff's already been done for you.
Yeah, there's always a name. There's always a character. There's always a backstory. But then you're
like, oh my god. And sometimes you're just like, I'm having a character appear for just one issue. Like they're gonna die or something like that. Like it's just like, imagine you're writing Batman and you're like, it's a case files type thing, and you're just like, this character died. Then you're like, you don't want to be so memorable that you're like, oh dang, I'm using this name, and
and they're gone.
They're gone now. Yeah.
I never think. I always think about that because I remember I was a sucker when like the audio commentary on DVDs was huge, and so I always used to like listen to every audio commentary to get like so much backstory. Oh yeah, right? Like,
Kevin Smith had some of the most amazing ones.
Well, Kevin Smith was creating podcasts before they were podcasts. Like there is on the Chasing Amy Laserdisc, that shit goes further than the movie. Like the movie stops and they're still talking.
Yeah, we used to, when I worked at Hollywood Video, we would play the commentary tracks instead of the movie.
That's great.
At night, particularly, you know.
Oh, no one's paying attention.
Yeah, you listen to Kevin Smith talk about mall rats, and
that's so cool that you worked at Hollywood Video. That was my video store when I was.
Oh, really?
Like growing up.
I worked there for a very little amount of time. It was like a very quick one. That's a whole other conversation I'd have. Let's focus.
No, yeah.
I don't get too tangented. We're focusing in here.
Yeah.
Okay, so JDog 1780. Do you format your plot panel to panel, or do you generalize what happens in each page of the artist? A little bit of both, but I'm gonna say panel to panel. So here's how I look at it. I do panel to panel. Like I really get in there. I do what was called full scripts. I describe what's in the panel. I describe, you know, the vibe of it. I describe obviously I write the dialogue in there, and but there's a note in my scripts basically like none of this dialogue is final, because when the art comes in, you might look at stuff and be like, I want to change a line. You might just be like, I don't need this line because the art tells the story anyway. Like I don't need it. Like I'm always trying to cut as much as I can. I'm not a heavy dialogue writer, so I cut as much as I can. But I also think scripts are kind of intended to not be read by your audience. They're supposed to be like a letter to the artist, is how I see it. And so you want to make sure they have all the information they can. So even though I'm doing panel to panel, at the top of that page, I sort of say what that page is about. Like what is the point of this page? What is the general, like, what are we trying to accomplish with this page? I also put that information in there because it's like, you want the artist to understand what they're going for with it, right? You can't just describe these very simple acts. It's funny, like Tom and I were talking earlier this week about this. Tom King and I were talking, and his scripts are pretty minimal. If you ever read his scripts are pretty minimal.
Yeah,
somewhere in between. But then also depends what the artist is. You know, when I was doing Nail Biter with Mike Henderson, I would keep it real light because Mike and I knew each other so well. When I work with Riley Rossmo, I will sometimes not put panel descriptions. I won't put panel descriptions. I'll kind of just put the actions of the page, but I still break them up as to how I kind of saw with panels, and then Riley is going to run with it however Riley wants anyway. So it kind of depends on who the artist is too. But I typically like to do the what is called full script. I can't do Marvel style. It would drive me crazy. There's elements of it where it's like I'm too much of a control freak to do Marvel style. You know, there's that story of Frank Miller wrote 5 pages, and then John Romita turned that into Man Without Fear, 5 issues.
Yeah,
right. Like he ran with that ball big time. You know, I love Man Without Fear. It's one of my favorite Daredevil stories. So probably my favorite. I know people like Born Again a lot, and I really like the Smith stuff with Joe Quesada, but I think Born Again, or I think Man Without Fear.
Man Without Fear.
Yeah, we've talked about this. Yeah,
well, those covers are just
the covers, dude, so good.
Yeah,
sometimes the gimmick covers they were doing, it's not just about the gimmick; it was the design elements too. It was just like really fucking strong.
Speaking to the cutting to the bone kind of situation, I will speak to that a little bit. Having a little bit of experience when I sent in my Terminator scripts, I got the art back, and I wanted to be so like open for the artist. I wanted to let Colin kind of like go for it, especially because there was so little page to work with. So I was like, I just want to like let the story kind of tell itself. And I get the pages back and I'm like, where's all the onomatopoeias? And like where's all the sound effects and stuff? And they're like, you didn't fucking put them in. And I'm like, oh. Like, yeah. Like, I was like, oh, right. Like it was so silent. And I'm like,
this is
I didn't want to overload it. And I was just like, but I cut too close to the bone.
No, you gotta put as much as. So I have this thing we used to teach when I was doing the kids books and stuff. We would go to elementary schools and we would teach comic writing, and we would do this exercise. We do an exercise where what I would do is I would go to all the kids, they'd get a piece of paper and it would have a prompt at the top, and it was like, describe a monster. Do not draw the monster, describe the monster, right? So all the kids would describe what they saw as this monster at the top, right? And then I would say, okay, exchange with who's sitting next to you. And now they're going to draw your monster, but only based on what you wrote.
Oh.
And I remember a kid was like, oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted the monster to have horns. And I'm like, did you write horns? And I was like, there you go. This is a lesson for all of you who want to write comics. It was on the page. The artist cannot read your mind. They do not know. And you might talk to them on the phone about it. You might Zoom with them about it. You put it in the script. You even say, hey, we talked on the phone about this. Like, you just put it in there. And if it's not there, it's not there. And that includes sound effects. And the dialogue. It includes intent. It includes vibes, all of it. You got to be real clear on those things, because if you aren't, they're not
It's
going
not
to
going to be
know.
there. They're not going to know.
Yeah.
They're not mind readers. So you got to
Yeah,
have.
you have to. You're providing
on
the
the
blueprint
page.
for the house. Yeah, like you're providing the blueprint for the house, but they're going to build that house. And if you don't put a front door in there, okay, they're not going to. As much as you think that like they're going to figure it out, like you can't assume like they are. It's interesting with writing, because I'll spend a week on a script, and then an artist will probably take 6 weeks on the same script. Maybe less, maybe more, depends on where they are. But they sit there with that script. They really spend a lot more. I'll tell you, they spend a lot more time thinking about it than you do. And so they do, like every page, give them that information. Give them as much as you can. So yeah, I try to put as much as I can there. Let's see here. How do you? This is from Kyle. I'm not even gonna try with this one. I'm also trying to read really small. I'm looking at my phone while we're doing this. All right, so how do you send your submissions, especially if you are an aspiring writer from the UK? Very hard to find companies that accept submissions. Submissions is tough. Everybody, Image has a submission policy. It's on their website. Marvel and DC are less likely with that. Most publishers have some kind of submission policy. The chances of you sending in a cold blind submission and getting anything is very slim. Not to say it doesn't happen, because we'll talk about that. So I have a rule, and I think there's another question that's similar to this down the line, and we'll probably cover it again. It's a question coming up here. Okay, so I'm going to jump around a little bit.
Sure.
There's a question coming up, and it says, any advice from either of you on how to persistently email editors without annoying them? How to connections is to begin with. For example, are conventions a good place for networking? Okay, so this is kind of they're both very similar. My answer
they're two-pronged. Yeah.
I only email people I've met in person. And that can be tough. Obviously, if you're living in an area where that's not possible, I feel like you have to have some kind of engagement with them beforehand, right? So it's a little bit like dating. And if you're gonna slide into someone's DMs, I hope you have a good reason, right? Like,
and you better have some kind of pre-established thing. Like there better be some kind of communication
to it. And I think that's something to look at with this. Is like, yes, that's really hard. It's really challenging. So if I was living in another country, that can definitely be really, really challenging about coming here. I do think you should go to conventions if you can. Thankfully, we live in an era where, because of social media and the internet, you don't absolutely have to do that. I think putting your work on the internet and sending that link to people, and we have so much stuff involving, like, you can put your comics online, you can get out there and you can do self-publishing. All this stuff is challenging. All of it is challenging. There's no, saying, oh, it's easy. Breaking into comics is really hard. It is really, really hard. I got lucky. I was doing a book with Desperado called Necessary Evil, and I would go to conventions and I would hand that book to every editor. And what I would do is that when I was going to conventions, I was just random scattershot handing it out to people or giving it to people. What I would do is I would say, who are editors making books I liked? And it was like, oh, if they're making a book I like, then I would find out, okay, they're going to be at this convention. That's great. I mean, it's weird. You have to really treat it like you're trying to get a job. It's like, it's so interesting. It's hard to explain, but it's like, do your homework, do your research. It's like when I would go to a convention, I would look up who was going to that convention.
Yep.
What were the panels? Okay, so there's a Marvel panel and it has this editor running it. That's awesome. That editor does a book I love. I can go up and be like, I really love this book. So I introduce myself. Here's my card, which basically is the book that I had made. Right? And I would just hand on that book and then be like, thank you for your time. I would love to be able to email you if that's a possibility. Can I get your information? Whether they would say yes or no. A lot of times they'll say yes, and they get a lot of emails. I remember talking to one editor one time, and he was saying he got 500 emails a day, and that seems small compared to some editors. Like, they get a lot of emails. Emailing is tough. That is why I say actively try to make it so there is some kind of engagement before you get to that stage, whether it is at a convention or the internet. But also be really respectful of people's time. Treat them like they're human. Nobody's trying to sabotage you. There are no actual guards. They don't know you is really what it comes down to. And again, it comes down to kind of like dating. You have to sort of approach it in a similar way. What email tips I would give you? This sounds really, be short and sweet, be very simple, and put what you want in the subject. Like, you'd be surprised how many people will email with "Hey."
Well, because they don't know what else to say. It's like, how do you broach something? You don't want to seem too eager. You don't want to seem too needy. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you know what sounds needy. You know what sounds eager.
Well,
You
this is
know,
what's interesting is that if you meet them at a con, you could be like, hi,
met
we
at New
met
York Comic Con.
in the subject, met at New York Comic Con / introductions. Like, it's just being really professional with this stuff and really looking at it like as a job and really slowing yourself down for a minute. I know I was relentless. I remember when I was in Brian's class talking to Bendis. I was in Brian Michael Bendis' writing class. We were talking about some of this stuff, and he would use the word ambitious for me. I know what he really meant, but it was like, because I would not let things go. And but I was always very respectful. I understood that sometimes not getting an email back was the answer. It sucks to say that, but sometimes they don't respond. That is the answer that you're getting at. You got to be able to. I'm a big believer in supporting people who make comics specifically. Like, I am more likely to recommend somebody if I've seen them actively try to make comics, right?
Yeah.
And so, but sometimes that does mean trying to open those doors for them to make them. And then for me, it was weird. I did a lot of mini comics, and I just gradually, made books. Like, that's how I broke in, with by making stuff. And then, so I did this book on Necessary Evil. I would hand it to people at conventions, and you get feedback from some people wouldn't. Some people would. I remember one big time editor opened up the first issue of Necessary Evil and said, "This hurts my eyes," like right off the gate. So it's like sometimes it could be really discouraging at times.
Were they right?
Were they right on that one? No, there's a reason why it was the paper. They didn't like the paper. The paper was this. We had gotten it printed. It's a whole long story. It's a very long story, but we got it printed on this like ultra glossy paper, and it was San Diego Comic Con, and it was reflective, and so the lights were bouncing off of it. You couldn't read it. Like it was a whole.
That's a lesson. That's like, okay, you know what? Like,
that's the thing. It's just being very direct, clean, clarity. You just have to be. That's a lot of stuff about storytelling too that I believe in. But I sent to Marvel. Like, I had just sent copies of Necessary Evil to Marvel, and I was like, this is who I am, this is what it is. The first 2 issues. Jordan White, he had just started working at Marvel. I don't think he had been there for a full year yet, and he got responsible for doing a backup story. He was able to do a Hulk backup story, and he was like, who do I hire? And they're like, this is your responsibility. This is your first hire. You get to hire someone. And Jordan, bless his heart, literally went to the slush pile and pulled out my comics, read them, liked them, emailed me, and that was my first job at Marvel.
Wow.
And I had never met Jordan before, but I had my email, my card in the package, so he was able to, reach out to me because of it at the time. And then I was able to go to DC, who I had been talking to a lot, and tell them, Marvel had hired me for something, and then they hired me for something. DC was like, no, we're not having that. It's a whole longer story we can get into about my long DC history of stuff, but breaking into comics is really hard. We could probably do a whole video just breaking into comics, and I can tell you my experiences and the challenges that are there. I do believe that a lot of it comes down to being professional, understanding that what you post on the internet does matter, and being able to approach people at conventions and be respectful. I've seen this before where people will literally go to editors at conventions and be like, you should fire the writers from your book. They suck. You should hire me. That person, more than likely the editor, worked on those books and spent late hours working on those books. That's rough.
Yeah.
So if you're living in other countries, which is definitely part of this question, there are conventions. If you're in the UK, there are conventions. There are signings you can go to. You can. I mean, it's tough to say. The first thing you have to be able to do is be able to prove you can make comics.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. That's really what comics comes down to. And Marvel and DC really are the big leagues. So it's really challenging to start there. You're going to have to. I talk about with other creators sometimes where they're just like holding out hope for that Marvel or DC job. And I'm like, dude, I did a lot of books before I got there. And even in between, I was doing Captain Midnight. I was doing RoboCop, did Predator. Like, I did a lot of books before I did Flash. And before I started really working at Marvel and DC, I did a lot of stuff. I did image books, I did a lot of mini comics. It's tough because that's the other question is how do you do that? And it's like, you just gotta, There's a thing. I read this a long time ago, and I don't remember who it was. And I've said this before. I think you and I talked before. So there was this famous writer. He was asked this question during the Q&A, and they asked this famous writer. They said, "Do you think it's worth making friends with big name writers in hopes it'll get you work?" And he was like, "I don't know how to answer this." He's like, I don't know. I'm not sure." And then he thought about it, and he wrote this whole article about it. And basically, he was like, "I don't think you should try." He's like, if that happens, if you suddenly meet Stephen King and you guys have some kind of connection, and he's like, you're not your fucking buddy, hell yeah, that's totally cool, no judgment, right? And then he's like, "You want to write a book together?" You know, that's not what happened with Scott. Scott knew Stephen King through something else.
Yeah.
Scott had a different connection to the King family before he did American Vampire. I'm not using that as an example, but he said, "I think that this writer, he said, I think you need to become friends with your peers, people at the same level as you, and then you become writers together." And so there are a lot of resources. There are forums, the internet in general. Like, go, if you have a comic book store, again, sometimes it's difficult because there are discords, there are forums. Join those things. Andy Schmidt has a program, a comic experience. You join that. Scott has his Substack. They have a Discord. That's a really great community of creators. Join those areas, and you will learn so much from just that. And you make those connections right there. Like, those are places. That's the way to go. I really believe, like Andy Schmidt has a comic experience program. You should join that one. If you're a comic book store sometimes have these events where they're like, see, in Portland, Steve Lieber has office hours at Books with Pictures. You can go and sit with Steve Lieber and talk. He mostly does art, but you can go, and Steve Lieber is amazing. So you can just sit and talk to Steve Lieber about comics. Like, go to those things. Go. If there are those places, you have to go to them. It sucks. I can be very antisocial. So, like,
try to catch Josh at a con off panel hours is tough. Especially if you know him personally and you're texting all day at San Diego Comic-Con just saying, "Hey, we're going to meet up at this location." It's going to be tough.
And I do a drive-by. I'm like, no.
I can't see you.
I got to go. I'm
walk and talk, maybe.
Yeah.
But
the chances of catching me at a bar at a convention is very slim.
That's true. Or, yes, you go to a party. Maybe Josh will be at the same party as you, but probably won't see him like I did.
You saw me at that party, and I literally walked in and walked out.
Yeah, you went, whoop, like Grandpa Simpson going into a burlesque show. You were just nope.
They walked in, I went, nah. Turned around, walked out. I remember people were like, "Dude, you were in there for like 5 minutes." I was like, not for me.
No.
You gotta be able to get in those spaces, and you have to be humble about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In New Jersey, folks, there's a guy, Anthony Marquez, amazing artist. He's
all
over the place. He owns the Joe Kubert School, and he is at Dewey's Comic. He owns Dewey's Comic City, which is also going to be moved. Everything's going to be moved into Madison. So but he's there, and all the Joe Kubert kids, like all the students who go there, they're there, and the Joe Kubert School does like these events where it's like all these different artists and writers will be there, and you can go and talk to them and pick their brain. Like Josh is telling you, like, foster your own kind of like creative community,
or think about Scott and I. Like, I met Scott 15 years ago when American Vampire came out. Like, the day American Vampire came out is the day that Scott and I met, and it's like we just started talking that day, and it's like there are a lot of creators who I have known for, like, I've known Dustin Nguyen since 2001. Like, I mean, you just gotta, and it's tough. I understand what we're talking about when it involves travel. Like, I am sympathetic to the nature of, like, you might be in a position you cannot travel.
Right.
There are resources on the internet. You can look at these forums, and when I was young, in the early 2000s, there was Pencil Jack. There was There was Comic Jobs. I was in those forums asking questions.
Yeah.
I was broke. I knew nobody, but I would just ask. Dustin said this thing about me one time, because I would hang out with Dustin when he had started doing, because I knew him before, but he would start doing Wildcats and some of the stuff he was doing, Wildstorm, and then eventually Batman. He said this thing to me one time. He was like, "Oh, when it's me and him talking, I'm this, I'm always been this person." But he was like, when we're in those bigger group settings, you're quiet. And he's like, "I think you're just listening." And I'm like, yeah, Yeah. I remember back in 2005, I think, I was hanging out with Layman, and Layman took me to Ed Brubaker's house. And I loved Ed Brubaker. I still love him. He's one of my favorite writers of all time. And I did not talk much. It was the two of them and then a bunch of Marvel writers, and I just sat there and just listened to everything that they were saying, because you absorb it, you learn it. I mean, just get those positions where you can learn. Go to panels. Sounds crazy. Go to panels. Go to when I was way I thought I told a story before where it was the Long Beach Comic Con had their very first convention. I think it was with Wizard, and there was a panel that was how to work with editors, and Steve Wacker was doing it, and this was when he was still at DC. And I went to that panel, and there was basically nobody there. Nobody showed up to this panel. And Stephen Wacker was like, I have a special guest that's coming with me today. And it was Jeff Johns. And I had actually met Jeff a few times before that. I met Jeff when he just started writing Flash at San Diego Comic-Con. He drew me a Hawkman. It was awesome. There was no Jeff line, because nobody knew who Jeff was yet, and I happened to read the first 3 issues and was like, this book is dope. You are awesome. And that's actually how I met Jeff, so it's, but I do think you getting yourself in these spaces and trying to, again, be humble and learn, and just learn and sort of see different perspectives, but trying to absorb that information. Again, I would try to get when it comes to the internet part, again, the travel thing is hard. Find those forums, find those places. Try to just get into those places, again, being respectful and just going and listening, absorbing. You will make those connections, and those connections, it's like what is that? There was a Warren Buffett quote where he was like, there is a person sitting in the shade right now because somebody planted a seed for that plant a long time ago, right? Wow. So I feel like that is the kind of stuff you plant the seeds. Like, I mean, Ben Abernathy is one of my close friends in comics. I've known Ben for a really long time, and then I would give Ben my books, and eventually Ben was like, hey, I really like this one, and then hired me. It's just, you gotta be able to do those things and show that you can make books, because ultimately that is the job.
Right.
There's a really great question in here about Hitchcock. I want to answer this. We're gonna answer it next time, because I have a long answer, because this is like a legit, like, philosophical, like, getting into a question. Yeah. This will take some time, so we're gonna skip it. And we'll come back to it, though. We will do this question, just not today. Okay. Hi, Josh. I was wondering if you could describe your writing. I think it's Eagle 411 with a 3. Hi, Josh. I was wondering if you could describe your writing process. How do you go from a concept to a fully realized story to then the script then gets published? As an inspired writer myself, I will love to know how an experienced writer such as yourself goes about things. Much appreciated. I kind of said at the beginning, I'm in a weird spot right now, because I am in a position with publishers where I can kind of just call somebody and say, here, I'm thinking about doing this. And I can be real vague and be like, I have kind of an idea, and they're like, all right, cool, let's talk about it. They're a bit more trusting of me, that I have the track record, the experience, they trust me. So it's a little different for me now. I have to go back in the day, where it's like, it really is just, it sounds silly, but it is this very straight line process. In some ways it diverges a lot, but it's like, I'll have a concept, I write it in my notebook, and then I just spend time with that. Like, there's an idea I have for a book. I've had it for a long time, and I haven't been able to crack it. It's like right now, I have this idea for a book, and I have scenes in my head, but it's not a book yet. It's not a story. And I haven't, and so I just keep thinking about it. I try to figure out my way into it. I do notebook work. When I was doing Nailbiter started because I always think about things I'm obsessed with. Like, what are things I actually like to write about? What are things I like? So I kind of start there. Because let me tell you, again, I said you don't want to write a book you don't like, but you also don't want to get stuck to an idea you don't like, or a concept, or, what I mean? Like, where's your passion? You're obsessed with it. Every book was something I was obsessed with. It's like, I'm not really a fantasy person. I'm not. Like, I love Lord of the Rings, but I'm not a big, fantasy reader. I'm not a big, I don't chase down fantasy stuff to absorb, It's funny, this week, my daughter, she's at camp this week, and I picked her up, and she was like, we played Dungeons and Dragons today. And she was like, can we get Dungeons and Dragon books? And she was super into it. She's like, can you and I play Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, oh, I was never a Dungeons and Dragons person. Like, I always thought it was really interesting. I knew people were really into it, but I was never really into it. And she was like, I'm really into it.
Well, I am.
And I was
so.
like, all right, let's get you some books. Let's get this guy. You know, I'm very supportive of my daughter into any nerdy stuff. She's a lot like me, so I'm always like, what do you want? You want a book? You get it.
Right.
Like, what do you want? Yeah. So with Nailbiter, I was like, oh, so Birthright was that. I wasn't obsessed with fantasy stuff. I was obsessed with the concepts of destiny. I was obsessed with the concept of like what happens when the fantasy story is over. So that's really where Birthright started generating, was like what happens when the story ends, kind of thing. Like what happens the next step, you know?
Right.
Which is part of the genesis of even like Walking Dead, was like what happens after the movie's over when these people have to keep going, right?
Yeah.
So with Nailbiter, I knew I'd always wanted to do a book about a small town. I knew I wanted to do a book about serial killers. And so I was like, because that's what you kind of look at. You look at what do you like,
right?
Is part of it, right? Like you look at what do you like. And so I was like, I know I really want to do a book about serial killers. I know I would do a book about small towns. I was on an airplane. I was doing research on serial killers, trying to find my way through this. And I started reading about the Zodiac, and I realized, you know, the Zodiac was in Riverside, California at one point, or he was suspected to have been in Riverside, California. I grew up in Riverside, California, and we started talking about that. And then I started looking at that. And then I was like, you know, it's crazy. When I was a kid, there were 2 other serial killers. There was a book, and then there was like just stuff with that. And I was like, that's so fascinating. Like, why would a small town have 3 serial killers in it? You know? And then I was on this airplane. I was flying to San Diego Comic-Con, and I suddenly just went, well, they were born there. They were born there. And I wrote that note down on the top of the notebook. I wrote, they were born there. And then I was like, oh, and then it starts filling in. And then I had written a short story about a monster called the Nailbiter. And I was like, no. And I had basically like merged all stuff together. A lot of notebook work. And then you just start sitting there thinking about it and thinking about the characters, thinking about the story, the world building, you know. It's interesting with creator-owned versus superhero books, because the superhero books, a lot of the character work and world building is done for you, so it's all plot. But with creator-owned, it's weird. You start opposite sometimes. It's funny, like you do want to start with character because you want to be like, why does this like with superheroes? You're gonna be like, okay, what am I putting this character through? What is the plot I'm putting them through, and how does this character respond to that plot? You know, why does it make sense for them? Whereas then with creator-owned, I mean, you're starting from scratch. I mean, it's a lot character first. You know, you're really getting into it. High concept, and then character, then plot, then world building. You kind of go in that order. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's a lot of notebook work. It's a lot of building out how these characters are going to react to the story. What is the simple story? And Sal, you and I talked a bunch where I'm like, if you can't sit with your buddy in the bar and tell them that story, tell them that concept, you don't have it.
Right.
You don't have it. If you can't sit there with your friend and just tell them it's like a joke, you know, like you ever hear people try to tell a joke and it just falls apart. Like, you know, the punchline doesn't work. That is it. I'll say to everybody listening, like, you should watch Twilight Zone episodes. Twilight Zone episodes are perfect, like, learning tools, because it is very beginning, middle, and end with the punch as a hook, and you know who the characters are, and you know what's happening, and you know what is going on. And Twilight Zone episodes are really awesome with that. So I always tell people, like, watch Twilight Zone. Think about Twilight Zone. Think about that rhythm that they have, because that'll help you out. But so I spent a lot of time on that. I have stacks of notebooks here behind me and around my office. Every project gets its own notebook at some point. Like, I have a DC catch-all notebook, which is just all the stuff we do. But then eventually I will take that and I will give it its own notebook. So, like, Superman has his own notebook somewhere in my office right now. It's a Daily Planet notebook. But everything gets its own notebook, and then I basically put everything in there, and then I gradually just start thinking about, like, what is it? Sometimes I'll write scenes ahead of time just to get the vibe of it. I think Bendis used to talk about this. He would write scenes with the characters talking to each other that nobody would ever read, just to get the rhythm of the voices. For me, I have to figure out what the point of view of that story is. Whose story is it?
Right.
You know, it's like, who is the point of view of that story? Who's that character? Who is POV? You know, who's going to have the emotional arc? And then you start trying to see the story through that character's eyes, not your own, and starting to place it out. And then eventually I'll start writing. But it can be grueling at times. I mean, when it becomes your full-time job, you're just like, I have a week to do this. Let's go. You know, you start learning muscle memory. It's like any job. You start to really get it to going. But going from concept to fully realized story to script that gets published, it kind of depends. I mean, there's books that I've written number ones that have never seen the light of day.
Wow.
that have never come out. Like I've had books I've written that have never come out. And it just takes time. Like you're just I would tell people realistically, like get as much work done before you start writing as you can. Like really answer those questions. So I have a piece of paper in my office, which is like 100 questions that I just ask myself. I just ask myself. And it sounds silly, but I just ask. And sometimes it'd be as silly as like, what does this character want? And why can't they have it? Like, I know that sounds silly, but does it? I was talking to Scott about this yesterday morning about how sometimes you have to really slow down and be like, I know everybody wants to be high-minded genius writers, but every once in a while, you gotta slow down and just look at the fundamentals, look at the basics and things like that. Like what am I actually trying to say? What is the actual story? And that's why I say sometimes you gotta just go, can you tell your buddy this story in a bar? If you can sit there with your friend and just tell it to them. If you can't, if you're bound, when you're not able to do it, that's a problem. So just try to get as much done as you can before you even get to the script. Like don't get cart before the horse. Make sure you have a story to tell, and then there's two things here. What is the story you want to tell? And then how are you going to tell it? Right. So you look at like Princess Bride, the movie. It's like they could have, obviously the book establishes the framing device, but what if some director had come in and been like, I'm not even going to worry about the sick kid and the grandpa.
Yeah. It's just straight fantasy
stuff, right? Like that's its own movie. And we wouldn't have liked it as much. It's the framing device. And obviously the book is different than the movie, but that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so that framing device, you have to really look at that. How do I want to tell a story? What is the thing of this? You look at like when Tom did Supergirl, it's told through Ruthie's writing, right?
Yep.
Like, and I think that's something everybody should look at is like, how do I want to tell this story? You look at some of these movies, you look at like Pulp Fiction and how it's this crazy compilation of things, but it does tell you a story. There is a narrative there, but it kind of jumps around, but it still tells you the story. How do you want to tell the story? Is it just A to B? Like I'm just pumping it out. I always recommend taking a look at that. Sometimes you do fall into those, especially when you're trying to hustle to get things done at some point. Once that train's going, it's going. I was talking. I as you could probably attest, I talk to a lot of creators. But it was like yesterday, Ron B and I were talking about this, where it was like sometimes you get like 3 months. It's always kind of a bummer when you're like, I have 3 months to write this issue 1, and then you have a week to
2 weeks
or whatever. It's like it sucks. Okay, so let's go to the next year. Do you have to make the staples yourself, or are those provided? Listen, I have had to hand staple comics before. When I was breaking in and making books, I have a stapler in my office that is literally for comic making. I use.
No way. Oh, yeah,
I've taken, dude. I've had to cut the pages. I've done it all. Like I have done everything I can to make books. But mostly private. Do you ever feel burnt out? If so, do you manage it? P.S. Love your run on Superman, Mr. Williamson. Thank you. Do you ever feel burnt out? Yes. We talked about this. I was pretty burnt out this time last year. I think being honest with yourself about what you're actually burnt out with, and then being able to be honest with the people around you, like just telling people I'm burnt out. I think there's a lot of fear of saying you're burnt out when you're burnt out. I think you got to just be able to say it. That's really it. Being honest. You got to just be honest with yourself. Be honest with people. If you're at the point where you recognize you're burnt out, I have a secret for you. You were probably been burnt out for a long time.
Right.
If you're saying I'm burnt out, you've probably been burnt out for a while and you didn't even realize it. It depends when it comes to writing, because at the end of the day, like this is our jobs. You got to make money, and burnt out can be really hard. But it can only get worse. You have to be able to slow yourself down and say, what can I cut back on? Where am I messing up? And being able to say, hey, I need a minute. Like that's really what it comes down to. Is just being really honest with yourself and the people around you about how burnt out you are. And if that involves taking some time off, giving yourself a week, do you need a week to just sort of decompress? You should take it if you can. When it comes to writing, it's hard because this is, it's a job. It's like any job, but you got to be able to take care of your mental health because it will catch up to you.
Totally.
At some point, it will not be your choice.
Right.
you know. So I would say just being really honest with everybody around you about what you're dealing with, and then look at what the worst kind of burnout is when you start to hate it. So it's like, look at what you love, just remind yourself of why you're there, what you love, and then just be really honest with yourself. Bon churro, man, I would go for a Disneyland churro right now. Let me tell you. When I actually was thinking about trying to there was a moment where because of stuff I was like, what if we went to Disneyland next weekend? And I'm a crazy person.
You just got back, man.
Yeah, that was in December.
Was it really? Oh my God!
It's been it'll be time.
How far back am I?
Yeah. When researching for a comic, are there specific sites or sources you trust more than others? What are some preferred sources for research? The books.
The books themselves. We
the
touched
books
on
themselves.
That.
So I will look at things like Comic Vine and like wiki entries and stuff like that. I will look, but with the intent of what do I
more research?
Yeah, it is. You can't read those as the research, and you got to look at the characters. Try to read the books. It's tough. Yeah. You can just flip through them. You know, I mean, obviously I have a lot of books in my office. It's kind of funny if somebody came into my office and didn't know what I was like, all the secret stuff I'm working on, they would figure it out real quick. Like, why do you have a stack of this character's books over here? And I'm like, no reason. Ignore that stack. Ignore that stack.
Oh, I'm reorganizing.
If somebody looked at my shelves, we could probably figure some stuff out. But
there's a good question about the shelves actually from Matthew Waste, who says, "Do you put all your work together on one shelf, or do you organize them alongside the rest of your collection?"
Both. So I have shelves that are for only my work. So when I get the comps, I crack the box open, I take out the 2 copies, and I look at them to make sure they're okay. I take one copy and I bring them both up here. One copy goes in the shelf, like where it goes, with that character. So a Flash, it goes next to all the other Flash trades because I have like every Flash collection. So I'm like,
yep.
And then I have other shelves over here. It goes by itself. So I go both places. Yeah.
Cool.
This person. Oh yeah. So with the research stuff, listen, it's funny because every once in a while, I wish I could. I'll Google stuff too. I'll just be like, I need information about this character, but I always read the book. So it's more about getting you a resource to tell you what to read versus just trying to read that kind of. You read the books. If you're, and same if I'm doing create your own stuff, I'll just go pick up a book out. Like you just read some books. If you're doing create your own stuff, sometimes I'll watch documentaries that are about that subject or within that realm. To get some ideas. So when I was doing Nailbiter, I watched a lot of serial killer documentaries. A lot. I bought a book. I bought like crime scene photo books. I have all this stuff. A friend of mine came to my house one time and I had this book about serial killers, and it was graphic. It was one of the more. It was real crime scene photo graphics, and I had it on the coffee table, and he sat there, pulled it up, and he straight up saw like BTK killings, and he was like, "What the fuck is this?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry.
It's research.
It's research. I promise. I'm not a serial killer, but yeah, there's a lot of that, and then sometimes talking to people, like I'll call creators,
right?
Listen, I talked to Mark Waid about Superman.
Yeah.
I called.
You've talked to him. You've talked to him about Flash too, but not in a way where you've like been inspired. Like you've been like, "Hey man, thinking about." I remember us talking about like
Flash. About Flash stuff a lot until way later. Yeah. I talked to him more about Superman and other stuff more recently about things, but like Dan Jurgens, if I'm doing anything that involves boosters. So when I knew what I was doing with Doomsday, I knew the whole Doomsday plan when it came to the Hunter Prey connections to Time Trapper. I told Dan. Dan was like, "Here's what my plan is," and I remember he put his hand on my shoulder and he was like, "You did it, good job." I was like, "Yeah." Like you go, I will go to them, get their takes, like anything with booster, I go to Dan. If you can literally talk to the person who created the character, that's always helpful, when it comes to superhero stuff. But there have been times where I worked on create your own books. There was a create your own book I had pitched to Vertigo, a long time ago, like 15 years ago, I think. And it was without getting into it, because I might still do that book someday. It was about a profession. So I knew somebody who had that job, and I just went and was like, "Hey, can I interview about this?" And so you just go talk to people. So that's ways of doing research. I try not to just I don't think you should really go to websites just for that. You might read interviews with people. I think that's always helpful, But this one here is, if you have another job, what is it? If not, how do you get to the point where you can only write comics and it be your sole job? Wow. So yes, this is my job. I only do this. I only write comic books. I think it's difficult to talk about this sometimes. I think if people kind of pay attention to me a little bit, I'm probably more over it than I am about some of the stuff. But it's like, I own a house with 2 cars. We go on multiple trips a year. My wife only has a part-time job. So I was very thankful to be a successful comic book writer.
Yes.
And it's funny when people are like, "How come you run the Flash for so long?" Because it sold the whole time. I've been really lucky that my books have sold. Like that's what it comes down to a lot of times. Is I've been very lucky to have my books actually sell, and so I've been able to do this as a full-time job because of it. It is difficult at times. I'm not gonna lie. There are challenges. I'm lucky that I get to write multiple books. I always joke around that, like, if I wasn't married with kids, I would probably write way less. But I try to maintain it. But yeah, this is my sole job. Getting to this was hard. When I was working at a design company and I was the production manager and later the art director, I would work that job and I would go home at night and I would work on comics. Brad Meltzer has talked about this, that when he was in college, he would come home every night and I think he'd write 5 pages. Just that was his rule. I'd come home, he would go to his room, write 5 pages, or it might have been 10 pages. And that eventually became The Millionaires. That was the book he made. It was his first book that he sold. It was the book that got him to become Brad Meltzer. He's talked about this. You got to just do the work. And it's hard. It's hard. Life is distractions. Life is tough. But you got to be able to sit down and say, I'm doing this. And it's really hard. I feel like I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, because I know there are people out there that are really struggling. And I don't want to in any way say it makes it easy or say the answers are easy. They're
right.
For me, even I think the turning point, I had a couple turning points. Like, I remember in 2010, I had enough work. I was working. 2012 was really that year. I was like, I'm good. I was like, I remember being like within 2012, and you and I have talked before, but within 2012, I was like, I have the money to pay my bills. And then when Voodoo got canceled, I suddenly went from having work to basically like October of 2012 being like, I have no work anywhere.
Yeah.
And but I got lucky that by the time I got around to 2013, like March of 2013, all of these seeds and things I had done suddenly blossomed at the same time. And I was suddenly writing, Captain Midnight, Predator, Ghosted, Birthright. Like and RoboCop. Like, I was actively really, really working. And then I made sure that I maintained being professional. I try my hardest to turn things in on time. You try to be a bit of a team player, but still finding your own identity, your own path. But it can be hard. But that's what the process I had to go through. I made sure that I was professional and did the work, which sometimes sounds crazy. People don't do the work and they don't understand why they don't get work. I'll tell you. It's a long process, and I think that's it. There's always that stuff of like, oh, it was a 10-year overnight success. You look
right.
You look at Bendis, you look at all these characters. I remember an eye-opening moment for me about breaking in. So I'm at San Diego Comic-Con. It's 2000. I think it was 2000. Maybe 2001. That's important for context for what I'm going to tell you. Sure. I think I told the story before, but I'm in line. I go to might have been 2003. I go to San Diego Comic-Con. I get in line to talk to the editors at Wildstorm, and I'm just going to introduce myself to Scott Doombear. That's all I want to do.
Yeah,
right? Is go over and introduce myself to Scott Doombear. I'm like, I would love to do Wildstorm books. I like Wildstorm. I'm a Wildstorm kid. Can I get in here? Right?
Yeah.
And there's this guy in front of me in line. This dude in front of me in line. And he and I talk throughout the line about breaking into comics. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's really hard. And he's like, I really want to do a Wildstorm thing. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm like, yeah, me too. We're talking. And we're, just very casual. He's trying to make comics. I'm trying to make comics. Nice conversation. Right.
Yeah.
He's a little older than me. He's like, yeah, I've had some success, but I really want to do a Wildstorm thing. So I'm going to do things. So we're waiting in line together to do the thing. To just get up and be like, this is who I am. This is my book. right?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm just gonna give him my business card. I'm like, oh, I have a mini comic. I'm gonna hand them. We're talking. We get to the front of the line. This dude pulls out his business card. He talks to Scott Duber. He's like, hi, I want to do Wildstorm books. That's when I give you my card. So he pulls his card out, gives it to Scott Duber. Scott Duber looks at his card and he goes, Brian K. Vaughan. He looks at the card and it had the hood on it. This is so funny. It was a white card. I have one myself. It was a white card, had the hood on it. Brian K. Vaughan, his contact information, the whole thing. And he was like, yeah, I really do Wildstorm books. And Scott Duber was like, yeah, of course. This is the thing. This is after Why the Last Man.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God.
This is not like baby Brian K. Vaughan. This is like when I heard his name,
you're like, what the
I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, we're gonna. Scotty Bird was like, you just wait right here. You just go over to the side. I'll see you in a minute. Like, let me get this line. You go over here.
Yeah.
Over here. I'll take care of this. Let me take this line. And then I got there and I was like, here's my mini comic. I would like to. And he was like, yeah, great, thank you. You know, I'll read it. I'll be in touch. Bye. I'm like, all right, cool. And then I ran over to Brian K. Vaughan. I was like, man, I love your work. I love it. Can I have your card? And he was like, yes, here you go. And I was like, awesome. And emailed him and I've talked to many conventions since then. But it was an eye-opening moment of like, this is a person who in this moment, I am like, dude, that was the guy in that moment, right?
Yeah. 2000,
one of those,
like early 2000s. Are you kidding me?
Dude. And he's waiting in line with me.
And he's waiting in line. Like he's not just like, that should tell you everything about the industry, right?
Yeah. But so that's the thing about trying to break into comics, make it your sole job. It took me a while. Like, I mean, I self-published my first book in 2001. And I believe by around 2010, I had pretty regular work. But I still had side jobs. I had other stuff I was doing. And then by the time I got around to 2012, that's when it became my full-time job. But even then you're talking about like, you know, it's tough, you know, you're paying the bills, but it's tough scrambling for work. By 2013, it was hardcore. I mean, by 2012, it was my full-time job. That's what I was doing. But by 2013, I was like, I feel comfortable. I have money in the bank. Is what it came down to.
Right.
All right, let's see this one here. Headless Pet. Sorry, I'm not reading everyone's names. I just forget. Sorry. Is there a technical aspect of the comic book writing process that is so important to the structure, but is it something the reader would be aware of?
I think so.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff.
There's structure you can see. Like sometimes you can see the scaffolding if you are paying attention, if you're that kind of mindset. But sometimes you just
making
forget.
a comic book.
Right.
Like, I think that's the thing that sounds crazy, but well, maybe in the give and take relationship with the script of the story and the artist's vision of the panel. When you write the script, it is far from a finished product. It is not even close. There are so many things that could happen between that and it coming out that can change things. You got to be able to recognize that when you're working on it. And the artist is 100% your co-writer. Like, they just are. And so when you finish the script, your co-writer is now taking it. And if you have a good relationship with them, you can talk back and forth. It can change. I know this sounds a technical aspect of the comic book writing process. It might sound silly. Do not forget you're making a comic book. As someone who's going to read this as a comic book. It is not a movie. It's not a video game. Right. It's not a TV show. Those are very different structures. There are page turns. You know, it's like there's cliffhangers. It is a different math to it. Like, and it sounds silly, and you might not see it at times. Just make sure you're making a comic book. It sounds funny. Like, there are people out there, I don't think they think of it like this. Like, I believe that every writer, when you're working, you should be able to see the comic in your hands. Like, you should be able to see what it is you're trying to do. Yeah. You know, if you're not thinking of it from that approach, you're not thinking of, I'm making a comic book, dude, that you're missing something. And you have to be able to sort of have like an out-of-body experience with your work at times and be able to look at it and be like, I am making a comic book, and does it match up with the stuff that I like? You know, I think that's it. The technicalness of it is that. I mean, definitely, you know, because I'm really mindful of that. Like, I'm really mindful of guiding the eye to the right, you know, making sure that, so this is, I guess, is a bit more technical thing. If you have a panel, if you have a page with 3 panels on it, and the most important thing is in the 3rd panel, that's not really what you want to do, because that means the reader is going to skip the first 2 panels. Right. They're going to see the biggest image first. You know, it's like whatever the biggest panel is, the biggest image, the most important thing, that usually should be panel 1. Like,
Right.
I mean, you really want to, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's ways of playing with this. You do establishing shots, you do aspect shots. There's different things you can do. I would also say, and this is my advice to everybody writing comics, try to avoid every single panel being a shot of people standing. And I don't mean heads. I'm talking about literally shots of people. Show me other stuff. Show me cities. Show me things. Show me things within the scene. You know, yeah, don't have it always just be, because it's funny with talking heads. I'm not even talking heads. I'm talking about standing figures.
Oh yeah.
Like the weird mix of like close up of face, 2-shot, wide shot. Try to find your own.
Mix it up.
Mix it up. Yeah.
You know what was really helpful for that back in the day? Like what was really, it's funny how like we've kind of lost this because of like just the expansion of the internet and the collapse of physical media is like the old Wizard magazine drawing board. The not just the drawing board, but there was another, like Capullo used to do a thing, Bart Sears used to do a thing, like just these like whenever anybody mentions that, I immediately remember, I think it's a Capullo one where he's like, here's a scene, and it reminds me just of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were gonna say was that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, where it's like, here's a scene of the Avengers, like, you know, coming in, there's a monster that's breaking into the Avengers mansion. Here's them springing into action. Here's them doing the exact same scene, but a little more dynamic. The Capullo one, I'm thinking of like, he's like, here's a scene of a character who's sitting in like an office. Like it was just like a detective. And he's like, you got to think cinematically. And he's like, you know, he moved the camera behind the ceiling fan and like got close-ups of like the guy smoking. And I'm like, yeah, that's Capullo to a T, you know, but it's like, it's such it could be a bland sequence, but you got to think about that. Now you're a writer. You've got to convey that to the artist. Now, most of the time the artist is going to kind of take that. Like they're gonna want to do that.
Yeah, they're gonna run with it. Yeah, you never know. I mean, again, that comes back to the question of like, what are you putting down on the page? Because you can say like vibe wise, and then sometimes they'll come back with stuff. And if you have a really good relationship, I mean, that's why I feel very lucky lately that I've really been working a lot with, and I've been lucky most of my career to work with people that are like, they're thinking about that. You know, like Tom Riley is really great with that on G.I. Joe, Jamal, Dan Mora, you know, Eddie Barrows. You know, I've been really lucky to have worked with a lot of artists who put that extra level of like, we're trying to tell a story, you know? It's really telling a story. It's not just cool images. Don't get me wrong. We all want cool images in our comics, but you're ultimately trying to tell a story. I'm going to burn through. Well, let's stop here.
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah.
And then you said you had a couple Patreon questions. We could do those, and then we can wrap it up, and then maybe we'll do this again next week to kind of tackle more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. We got a couple of Patreon questions here, and it's only actually like 6. So I'm going to save a few of them for the next time. Because you know, you kind of tackled one of them, which was Shield Smith, who said, "How do you know when you're the right fit for a character?" And you do answer that pretty much to a T. But he went more specifically with it.
There are times you got to be honest with yourself. You might not be right for that character.
Well, in his case, Shields was like, I love Spider-Man, but I think my love for the character would hinder me from telling an honest story.
You are the character. This is the truth. When you're taking on a character, you are that character's villain. Part of your job is to kind of put them through hell. Like, you got to be able to challenge them. And I don't mean like hurt them, but I mean, you got to challenge them in some ways. It depends on the book, you know? I mean, there are times you can kind of get away with being like, I'm just going to do this like fun adventure book. There are places for that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what people want is they want conflict. They ultimately want this person to be challenged because that's how you reveal who they are. Like, they want those things. And man, sometimes you were the one. I mean, think about Daredevil. Frank Miller put Daredevil through hell.
Yeah, you could argue that guy does not like Daredevil. And it's like, no, but he loves Daredevil. Like, he wants to tell that story.
Well, that's it, though. Like, oh, man. You know, because one of my favorite, I've done it many times in my books, but my favorite is when a character gets the shit kicked out of them and they still stand up. Dude, Captain America, I can do this all day. We all love it. Like, if you can sit there and have that character just get the crap beaten out of them, either physically, mentally, emotionally, and they still stand up and they go, I'm not going to stop.
Bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on. That we all love it. We all love it so much. And you gotta do it, you know?
That's the thing. Like, there's a couple of runs where it's like, writers will do the same thing with the same character. And sometimes it hits, sometimes it don't. And the difference is just how like how the character gets back up and what they say, and like
pushing through the pain. I mean, you look at Spider-Man pushing up, like lifting stuff up.
all you think about is like the big machine, or JMS
Yeah.
is having Morlun beat the first time when Morlun just beats the tar out of him. Like I've
Yeah.
seen that moment. That moment's a 20-year-old moment, and I saw it go viral on TikTok the other day. Just somebody is showing you just that sequence of just him.
Remember Doc Ock beat the crap out of Spider-Man in their first appearance, and that was like
first appearance. Takes his mask off, and he's like, "I think I quit. I think I'm done."
yeah. But he comes back.
Yeah,
you want them to come back. You want them to be like, "Oh, I'm not done with you," and that's what you get. Like that's what we want from our characters, and so it's funny. Like ultimately the person, like when you're thinking about the Joker, like if you're doing the Joker versus Batman at any time, it's funny. You're just like, well, now I got to get ahead of the Joker, and the Joker has to fucking find a new way to kill the Batman, and I gotta sit there. You know what I mean? Like, well, is it the Joker killing him or you killing him? You know what I mean? It's like that's where stuff gets really tricky. You got to be able to do that. But yeah, like it's tough when it is hard to love a character and be like, I'm gonna put them through hell because that's what this story is. Not always, but that is if you like, I always remind people to look at the stuff they love and why you loved it, and that is something to do. But yeah, there are times where I've loved a character and been like, I'm not sure if I'm right for this character or not. That has happened. I have turned down books. There was a big book that DC's asked me to do a few times, and I've turned it down because I don't think I'm right for it. Even though it's funny, I have a lot of opinions on it, I have a lot of thoughts on it, and but I'm not the right first person for it. So
sure,
yeah.
Chris Wolf wants to know, and I don't know if you can answer this question because of things, but like, what Marvel book would you want the most chance to write? I know the answer to this, but I don't know if we want to talk about it.
I think people could figure it out. I have like
not only that, but there's also we did a whole episode recently, and who knows how recently, where we were like, what book would be great for Josh, and like there's a ton of those.
I have a lot of ideas and stuff for that space, and there's a lot of characters I would want. Again, if somebody came in my office, they'd be like, oh, okay. I have shelves dedicated to characters. I have posters in my office. People would figure out like this is all the DC stuff, but once you got to the other side, you'd be like, oh, I know exactly what he wants to do. But yeah, I don't think I should say too much in that space.
No. Bear Farmer wants to know, have you ever made a story for a specific character, but you weren't allowed to use that character, and then forcing you to rewrite the original story slightly to better fit the character, or do you just throw that out and then start from scratch?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm writing I don't believe in what it's a phrase called filing the serial numbers off. I don't like it personally. I know people have done it, and that's their prerogative. More power to it, but I just don't do that. Like if because it's about that character's reaction to the story. That's the story,
Yeah.
With Superman, I realized this when I got the Superman job that you can't change Superman. You can't change Clark. If he is a constant, and everyone has opinions on him, and most of those opinions align. We all kind of have our thoughts on what Superman is, and so it's more about taking Superman and dropping him on a story and seeing how he reacts to that story. Right? That becomes the story. That becomes the conflict. That becomes the thing. And I think that with most characters, that is true. And so if you have an idea for a story and you're like, well, here's my idea for the story, and it's with this particular character, then the story is really about that character's interpretation, their point of view, and their experiences. And so that becomes the story. You can't just then take it and move to somebody else, because then they would react differently to it.
Yeah.
And so you can't do that. So I don't do that. I don't think I've ever been like, oh, I have an idea for this character. Oh, I can't use that. Well, I'll use it for this character instead. It's like, no, I think the closest. No, I'm not gonna tell that story.
At the very least, I can imagine a scenario where you're like, I have like a problem, and then I go, well, how I want it for this character. They can't, like, I can't use that character. Well, how would so-and-so solve that problem? But it's like, again, the problems are all character specific.
Then your story changes because of it.
Completely.
It's like you might have a high concept, but then once you put the character against it, they're going to react to it. And that's how it leads. I think the closest, we talked before, at one point when Justice League Suicide Squad, we had a plan to introduce a couple of villains in that story when we were doing Justice League Suicide Squad, and Jay Fallback designed all those characters.
Mm-hmm.
And none of those characters have ever seen the light of day. And there were times where I was like, oh, what if we use one of these characters and something else? I think the closest is like Bloodwork. So Bloodwork was one of those characters, but we ended up changing his story completely and his look completely. Like we did a complete new design for him. Mm-hmm. That Neil Gooch did. And then we put him in Flash. But then again, it was like, that's the closest I can come to is like, oh, we had an idea for a villain, and then we moved it for different reasons, and then that becomes a thing of that character changes because again, the story changes because of the surroundings, you know. So that's the closest I can really come to. Yeah.
Fair. Cool.
All right, one last one, and then we'll call it a day on this.
Oh man, a couple of them are really big. Like, there's a great one because it's a Birthright question of all. Austin,
okay.
Austin says, "I picked up the Birthright hardcover and I could not put it down. Where did that story come from? Did you just read Chronicles of Narnia and say I need some more entrails, or was something else?"
Oh man, that's funny. They say Chronicles of Narnia. Yes, dude, talk about nailing it. Good job. Whoever this person is, what is their name?
That was Austin. Says that.
Good job, Austin. Good job. Yes. So I've always been fascinated with the idea of destiny, but not only destiny, but if somebody tells you, I think about this with athletes. I think about this with life in general. If you believe your entire life is about this one moment. So let's say you're a football player and you're like, man, all I want to do is play in the Super Bowl and win. And then you do it. What's next? Do you do it again? Do you retire? Do you go, I did it, I'm out? You know?
Yeah.
But then when you start getting like really high concept stuff where it's like, oh, it's your destiny to save the princess and rescue the kingdom and defeat his evil lord. What do you do after that?
Yeah.
You know, and what happens if you fail? You know, it's like I was always thinking about these ideas of destiny a lot. And so I was always thinking about that. Like, I want to do a book about the story after that. Like, what happens after you save the princess? What happens after you defeat the evil lord? Like, what happens next? And so I was thinking about that a lot. When I was a kid, I really loved the Narnia books. This is funny. I was just talking to my wife about this a few weeks ago. And I know that Greta Gerwig is doing it for Netflix. Like, she's doing a series of Narnia, and I was like, it's so interesting. I'm really fascinated to see how she's going to do it. I haven't read those books. We have them downstairs, but I haven't read them in a really long time. I actually started rewatching Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Disney one, a few weeks ago. I just like put it on one night. And so, yeah, I was thinking about the idea of destiny, but then, and the story after, right? I'm always like, well, what happens? What if kind of thing. A lot of times comics is what ifs. Like you are like, this happens basically, you know? I was like, oh, you know, it's crazy when those kids go through that crazy adventure in Narnia and then they walk through the wardrobe and they're just kids again. Yeah. I was like, it'd be crazy if they came through the wardrobe and they were adults.
Right.
That is where the idea came from. It was like, oh, they came back and they were adults. Yeah, that would be crazy. And then it became a story about destiny and about family and about life and how sometimes life could throw you curveballs and can be unexpected and finding a new path, and how sometimes what you thought was going to be your path in life might not be it. It might actually go a different direction. And that is okay, right? It's about how you respond to those things. All those were ideas that went into Birthright. But yeah, Narnia, I'm not going to lie, Narnia definitely played like a factor in my thought process of like fantasy fandoms. I mean, it's funny I was saying before, like I don't consider myself a fantasy person. Like, it's funny to like talk to somebody like Jim Zub, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, like that dude, that is his thing.
Bread and butter.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was looking up the Dungeons and Dragons books for my daughter, and they were all written by Zub.
Yeah, he's their guy. No, it's
I was like, oh yeah, he really, because he wrote all the Young Adventurers books and stuff. And this is awesome. Good for Jim, dude. But I don't really consider myself a fantasy person. You know, one of the influences on Birthright was actually things like Lock and Key. Lock and Key was the book, the Joe Hill one, that was an influence on it too. That was family. That was a family story. I like stuff that kind of comes back around to family a lot of times. Family and friendship is magic or two that I always find really fascinating as story things. But yeah, I'm not really a fantasy person. But I have read a lot of fantasy books. I've watched a lot of fantasy movies. I just don't really consider myself like it's just not something I drive in that direction, you know?
Sure.
But that's part of why Birthright, I think I wasn't as precious about it. And this kind of goes a lot of other questions about, I've had this conversation with other editors, and Dan DiDio and I would talk about this at times, about the challenge of becoming way too precious about something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't precious about fantasy or fantasy tropes So I was able to just tell a family story using the tropes of fantasy to develop Birthright. But that goes into anything you're writing, is being able to not be too precious about everything and being able to. I mean, it's tough. Like the whole phrase of like "kill your darlings," like that's real.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, sometimes you're just like, oh, this isn't working. I love it, but it's not working. I gotta cut it, or this splash page, or this moment, or this beat. I don't have room for it, but it can go. And if it can go, that means it should go. You know,
Yep.
it's
Yep. We were talking about an idea I had a while back, and I was like, what if it's this though? Like we had it. I had this whole thing ready to go, and then I'm like, I was in the shower, and I thought, why didn't we do this? And you were like, that's it. And I'm
yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just like, but that's gonna f up my life. Like I gotta change everything. You're like, yeah, I know.
Oh, man, sometimes it's dominoes, dude. It's so funny. Like when you're writing, sometimes you have to look to the dominoes and the threads you pull. I was just talking about this with Ben Abernathy. It's more about a GI Joe thing where I was like, I have, we're pretty outlined out on GI Joe. Like we know what we're doing, and there was a moment where I was like, oh, I had an idea for something. I was stuck on one thing, and it led to me having an idea for another. And I went to Abernathy this morning, and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing this. And he was like, oh, well, what if you do this? And I was like, I already thought about that. But the problem is, if I do that, that means I'm pulling a whole thread. And I don't know where that's going to go. Like, that could unravel something else. So I have to be careful. But then you have to realize, like, well, maybe some guys just do it. It's tough sometimes. I mean, when I was doing Nailbiter, originally Warren was going to be locked up. Like, he was going to be in prison. And I remember I was watching Dexter, and I was like, I really wish that they had like just straight up found out Dexter was a serial killer. I mean, his sister does, but I was like, I kind of wish it was a known thing, but they couldn't think about it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about Hannibal, and I was actually writing the first issue, and I had a scene where Finch was driving to the prison to talk to Warren in the prison cell, and I was like, this is just Hannibal. This is Silence of the Lambs. And I was like, it's so limiting. It makes me have to go back and forth this set piece. I've seen this. And that's when I was like, oh, what if he's free? Oh, okay. But then that meant I had to pull that thread, and it was the right decision.
Yeah.
I had to rewrite a bunch of stuff. I had to rethink the entire book. But it was the right decision to pull on that thread. And, when you're writing on these things, I guess what we should sort of wrap this one up. I know this was a bit more of a serious one than we normally do. It wasn't me just bullshit about movies.
Yeah, that's okay. But, no, it's important. You're a font of information, and it's a resource that's it's so woefully underutilized. People don't get a chance to ask these questions. They don't get these answers so directly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like I'm always here for these kinds of questions, and if you ever see me at a convention, I always tell people, I'm like, if you ask me questions at a convention, I'll be honest with you. Like I won't, I try to be sympathetic to this stuff, and really I recognize how much of this stuff, particularly when it comes to Marvel and DC, I get it. I am also very passionate about these characters. Like I take stuff personal too, and so in terms of the character stuff, so I understand the stories and things like that, so I understand, and so I try to talk about. But when people they really want to break in, I remember how much I wanted to break in, and how much there were times where I would feel so incredibly desperate. And it was like going to these conventions and trying to be earnest, but not too earnest, and just trying to get in front of people and just giving their books. I mean, listen, I've had times where I gave people my comics, and there was an editor one time I gave him my comic. I walked away, and I was like, oh, I forgot to tell him something. I turned around to walk back to them, and I saw them throw my comic in the trash.
Oh, yeah.
And so, listen, comics will always find a way to make you humble. Jack Kirby, like, comics will break your heart. It's hard, and breaking can be really, really hard. And I try to. That's why I do believe that, like, sometimes the best advice I could give to you is do your research, do your reading, like read Understanding Comics. Like read the stuff, like the books that Will Eisner wrote. Like, Brian Michael Bendis has writing books. My entire bottom shelf right here, you can't see, is all writing books.
Yeah.
Gil Kane has written stuff. Like, there are people out, not Gil Kane, I'm sorry, Dave Gibbons.
Yeah.
Get in there. Like, read those books, read those resources, learn. I mean, I learned so much from Understanding Comics. Stephen King has written books. I mean, Alan Moore, it's like read these resources that are available to you, and then get on the internet, try to find these spaces, and try to talk to people. And again, be humble, be respectful, and just get in those spaces, and it's okay to be enthusiastic. We're all enthusiastic. Again, I was
Oh.
probably crazy annoying.
Well, and you've told that story, like, just, when you were breaking in, yeah, but even when you were an established writer and you like cornered Dan DiDio and you were talking about the
Oh yeah,
Flash, like you get passionate, and it's like he's just like, holy shit,
yeah.
like
The DC made like little anime thing of that whole thing where Dan was like, "Ooh!" When I saw Dan the next time when I pitched him Flash again, and I got
yeah,
the job, he brought a towel. Did I ever tell you this?
no,
He brought a towel because the first time I was sweating so much while I had like run.
but you had to run, yeah, you were running
I ran
across
to
the.
it. Yeah, I ran to it. I ran in the hot sun wearing all black with a black hoodie in San Diego in July.
You can't. I can't even run in that. I have shorts.
I was late, and I ran to the meeting, and they put us in a small room.
Yeah,
and
it was one of the like behind the booth, right? It was like a little box.
Yeah. It gets hot in there, and I was just ranting about how I want to write the Flash, and here's my pitch, and Dan is like, I'm red-faced sweating. But Dan had I met Dan many times before this, so it was like Dan knew that I was a complete crazy person. I was a complete nut. I hate that these phrases of like they want to hire, you have to be able to do 2 of the 3 things. You have to be really good, on time, or really easy to work with. They have to really like you,
Yeah.
I think sometimes ultimately if you're really good, the rest doesn't matter. It's got a few times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's funny, like I've gotten work in comics because somebody else messed up at times. Like those opportunities sometimes come around in weird ways. But you have to be able to make yourself available, and they have to, know that you are somebody that they can work with, because comics is weird. Comics is a small group of people, and we're all with each other all the time, and it becomes it is a team.
Yeah.
Every comic is a team, and I'm sure if anybody's ever played a sport, done any team challenges or teamwork, it is tough.
Yeah.
And you have to, you need to be able to have a worth in that team, a value to that team, and you got to find that place. But yeah, so with all this stuff, what I could do maybe next time, I can maybe bring in some scripts. We can put scripts on the screen. We can do all kinds of stuff. Yeah, there's ways we can get into it about pitches. Sal has read my Nailbiter pitch a ton of times. My Ghost pitch, I would use as an example. Maybe next time we could actually really we could maybe
over them.
Yeah, we can go over Nailbiter and Ghosted and really just go into why I did it the way I did it. Yeah, so that's it for today. That's a lot of stuff. Today was less focused of like, let's talk about Superman. It was more about this. I hope some of this is helpful. Thank you for the questions. We will do another one of these. We'll get into the rest of the questions for both. I'm sorry if we didn't get to you today. We were literally doing them in first come, first serve order as best I can. Hitchcock question, it was funny. I actually saw that on Monday, and I was like, I thought about it a lot this week, and I feel like it's a longer, because I love Hitchcock. So you bring up Hitchcock, that's a whole other thing. Like we have a whole thing about that, about filmmakers, and how much I have taken a lot of my sensibilities actually come from film directors and stuff. So so that's a whole other thing we can get into. But I hope this is helpful for everybody here. I hope this was engaging. I know again this is not of my normal thing with Sal of just us bullshitting about comics and movies.
Yeah, just talking about 90s comics and stuff.
No. Comics. Yeah. Somebody, I think one of the questions was like, was there ever a comic that you like, everybody else hate? And I'm like, Bloodlines. We talk about this all the time.
Yeah, the answer to that. Somebody else had a good question about the 90s where they were like, how is the 90s the most like exciting and also worst decade for comics? Like, and I was like, that's an interesting question too. Again, we'll have to table it.
But the funny about that question is, I will give you a tease of that question. There is somebody out there saying that about every era.
Yeah, that's true.
Every era has somebody being like, why is this the best and the worst? Every single era. So I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Because the 90s, I think the 90s get a bad rap, but
they do.
When you really look at the stuff that was in the 90s, you're like, we talking about
that too? Like, yeah.
No. Yeah, so much of the stuff we have now comes from that. Obviously, just chronologically, but there's a lot of amazing books. I mean, I got Preacher right here, man.
Yeah, there's still, they had been trying to make a Preacher movie, show, whatever, since the book came out.
Yeah,
like, and then it finally did, like, only a few years ago. Like, it's still, there's tons of stuff. It's relevant.
There's tons of stuff. Yeah, I mean, the 90s are a fascinating era of comics, but that's a whole other conversation.
So that's another show. So. Thank you, Josh, for
So,
being here. Thank you for lending us your expertise and your insight
yeah,
and your time. And
yeah, it's always fun. You know, I mean, you and I talk outside of this otherwise, but yeah, I just want to say thank you everybody for watching. You know, yeah, we'll do this again, and yeah, thank you. I thank you for the questions. I hope this has been helpful. If you want any clarity on anything I said, just drop it in the comments, and we'll try to cover it.
Yeah, please do. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot, everybody.